My name is still Sheldon Helms. Thank you. Heard of me. And I'm still the Vice President of the Bay Area Skeptics, so far. For anyone with even a passing interest in skepticism over the past decade or more, our next guest needs no introduction. Brian Dunning is the creator and host of the popular science and critical thinking podcast, Skeptoid, which attracts, according to Wikipedia, over 160,000 listeners each week.
That's very old.
Brian says it's more, so he can talk to Susan Gerbic about that. The podcast has garnered Brian the 2010 Parsec Award for Best Fact Behind the Fiction Podcast from the Independent Investigations Group, as well as the 2012 winner of the Stitcher Award in the Best Science Podcast category, among other awards. Brian is a tireless educator, not only through his podcast, but also via his video, Here Be Dragons, an introduction to critical thinking intended for general audiences, and his soon-to-be-released educational video, Principles of Curiosity. Brian is a member of the National Association of Science Writers, as well as the chancellor of this non-accredited online institution, Thunderwood College, a parody of unaccredited online institutions of higher learning where you can today instantly download a degree for yourself in subjects such as acupuncture and acupressure, divinity, feng shui, intelligent design, and chiropractic, to name just a few. Brian speaks for colleges, universities, and other organizations across the country, discussing his investigations into a very wide array of subjects like the Bermuda Triangle, homeopathy, the Philadelphia experiment, UFO sightings, and literally hundreds of other subjects. Brian's talk today is entitled Waterspouts and Swamp Gas, Challenging Popular Assumptions. Please help me welcome to the stage my friend Brian Dunning.
In 1993, a young man stood outside a large wooden compound in Waco, Texas, and he watched as flames and large black billowing clouds of smoke destroyed the complex. He was among a group of onlookers who were there on site, and he watched as some 70 people lost their lives violently. He heard the gunshots, he saw the government agents encamped around the compound. And this changed him, it had an effect on him. And he kind of became somewhat of a loner over the next couple of years. He began writing letters to the government. He especially wrote threatening letters to an FBI hostage rescue team sniper who had killed the wife of Randy Weaver at Ruby Ridge. He wrote other letters as well. He surveilled government compounds. He stood outside Area 51 and took pictures and video. He joined the gun show circuit, kind of traveled around and followed gun shows where he could meet other people who shared his belief that was becoming more and more cemented, that the US government had declared war on the American people and was actively pursuing that war. Finally, he went into business with a friend, buying bulk purchases of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, which, as you probably know, can be used as an explosive, selling it to other people who shared his belief that they could build bombs and so forth. And then one day in 1995, he built a bomb of his own. He loaded up a truck with his ammonium nitrate. He drove it outside the federal building in Oklahoma City. He lit a 2-minute fuse, and he walked away down the street. Now, if you've ever seen any of these videos from Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., where you see these IEDs, these improvised explosive devices exploding, you've probably seen some smallish ones that look kind of like Hollywood, billowing flames and things like that, and you've probably seen some of the real ones that are on a whole different scale. Bang, and it's an explosion, a debris cloud the size of a skyscraper that appears instantly. It's terrifying. This was that kind of explosion. 300 buildings in Oklahoma City were damaged by this explosion. It knocked him off his feet. He was only a 2-minute walk away. And among the 168 people who died inside the building were 19 kids, which only made him America's second greatest mass murderer of children. This happened because of his assumptions, his belief that the US government was pursuing a war on its citizens. He actively sought out information that confirmed this belief, and he ignored any information. He certainly did not pursue any information that might have challenged his belief. It happened because of faulty assumptions. We'll come back and talk about Timothy McVeigh again a little bit later. But that's heavy. Let's lighten up a bit. This is a fish. Any questions? No? That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's a fish.
So for hundreds and hundreds of years, fish have been reported to fall out of the skies. Sometimes it happens during a rainstorm, sometimes it happens out of a clear blue sky. And other times, frogs are also reported to fall out of the sky, sometimes during a rainstorm, sometimes out of a clear blue sky. And these reports continue today. There was just one, if you follow the skeptical web pages on Facebook or anything, you may have seen one reported just a week or two ago. Well, if you've ever seen this reported in the mass media, then you've probably heard this explanation. Waterspouts. The most common explanation, science-y sounding, is that waterspouts reach down into some water somewhere, find a school of fish or a school of frogs, elevator it up into the sky, transport it hundreds of miles inland, and deposit it in one neat little group somewhere. That's the current explanation. It's one we all assume is true because it's what the news always tells us happens. But there's another strange phenomena I also want to talk about today, and that's mysterious lights in the sky. For hundreds and hundreds of years, this is by no means a 20th century, 21st century only phenomenon. People have been reporting mysterious lights that they see in the sky. Are they UFOs? Are they aliens? Sometimes they're not always on the sky. These are the Brown Mountain lights in North Carolina. Someone correct me, is that right? North Carolina? What? Okay, I didn't need to be corrected, because I'm Mr. Skeptoid from Skeptoid.com. Ghost lights like these have been reported all over the world. By no means is this the only location. They're mysterious lights that people see that there's no evidence source for. Sometimes they're in the sky, sometimes they're at ground level, like these are. Some of them, like this one in Thailand, you can actually go and see for yourself. This is the Naga Fireballs, an annual festival in Thailand, where they've got cement bleachers that have been built here because this is now the major tourist industry in this area. These extend for over 3 miles along the side of the river. That's quite a construction project, 3 miles of cement bleachers. But if you go there during this festival, you will see mysterious lights rising up out of this river and flying up into the air. They are believed to be fireballs spit by the Naga, a river serpent, but you will actually see them. We can talk about the cause of that, which you already know if you listen to Skeptoid, or we can talk about it in the Q&A afterwards. So, for many of these cases, what causes these ghost lights that people see, whether they're at the ground, whether they're up in the sky, and you'll almost always hear swamp gas. Swamp gas is proposed as a possible explanation for these. It was first proposed by author J. Allen Hynek, a crazy person, as a possible explanation for some of the lights that he thought might possibly not be alien spaceships, which he thought were the vast majority of ghost lights. So, this is real swamp gas. Real swamp gas is a terrible explanation for those. It's caused by the decomposition of organic matter in a swamp or some such place. It's mostly methane, and it actually can spontaneously ignite, but it's never been observed to do so in nature. It does require very specific concentrations of specific gases to spontaneously ignite, which we have been able to recreate in the laboratory. When it does ignite, it goes pop with a sudden blue-green flash, and it's gone in an instant. At no time does it ever burn yellow or orange or float up into the sky as a constantly glowing fireball. It's completely different from what its proposed explanation would have you believe. So what's the real cause of these ghost lights? Well, we don't know. It's various things. Each one of them has different explanations. I've talked about a lot of different ones on the Skeptoid podcast. They're different things. One is a train light seen way off in the distance. Others are lights seen over the horizon because of a mirage effect. They're various, they're unidentified, but they're certainly not swamp gas. We can tell that for a fact because we've tested it. So how about this explanation of waterspouts for fish falling out of the sky? Wait a minute, why are you laughing? Because if you're saying waterspouts distribute fish inland, then you're saying Sharknado is a factual documentary. You can't have it both ways, folks. You can't laugh at one and not the other. So this is an actual waterspout. That visible column you see is not a solid column of water moving upwards like an elevator. It's simply the lowest pressure zone of the tornadic waterspout, as we call it. And it's visible because that's water vapor, which is more visible than air. It's low pressure zone. It's not an upward elevator. The air inside is not moving up. There is no elevator mechanism. There is nothing about a waterspout that could lift things up in the air, or that certainly they could reach down into the water either. They simply don't work that way. Snorkelers have had waterspouts go right over their back while they're in the water and not been aware that anything happened. Sometimes we see in tornadoes, we see debris flying around in the air. We see water flying around in the air. That's just stuff getting kicked by the horizontally moving wind. It's moving horizontally in a vortex. It's not moving vertically. It's not moving up that waterspout. So then we ask, what might be the true cause of these frog and fish events? Well, we certainly don't know what all of them are because we have very little information on most such reports. But for many of them, we can certainly trace them down to something as mundane as this. The fish were already on the ground. There are a lot of species of fish that do natively come up onto the ground, often in schools. And you'll see a bunch of fish on the ground. You think, what the heck is that? They must have fallen out of the sky. People couldn't guess how else they got there, because how many of us have seen fish on the ground at random? None of us, right? Because it just doesn't happen that often, because we're not familiar with these species of fish. What you're seeing right here is a walking catfish. It's native to Southeast Asia, but it's now become an invasive species, and it's found all over the world, particularly in Florida. And you'll see these guys getting reported as fish falling out of the sky in Florida quite often. There are 18 species of mud skippers. Now these are kind of weird alien-looking things, and I don't expect that these are the cause of many of the reports of fish falling out of the sky, because you'd say aliens fell out of the sky if you saw these. Nevertheless, there are another species of fish. There's 18 species of these in Asia, India, and Africa. But the king of all fish fall reports are the climbing perch. It looks exactly like a regular perch. There are 36 species of climbing perch throughout Africa and Asia, and India is where you'll find most of these reports coming from. And the climbing perch is not new to science. This is an old engraving, whatever it is. It's new to most of us, because how often do we go outside and see perch walking around on the ground? Not very often. So when people do see a bunch of fish on the ground, they say they must have fallen out of the sky, because I can't think of any other explanation. But people who study this kind of fish can easily tell you, yes, these were simply climbing perch, doing what they normally do, which is they move from a pond to a river each season to spawn or whatever it is that they do. And the same goes with frogs. Frogs often will move between one pond and another pond to spawn or to feed, and they almost always do it in a big mass migration, especially in places like Florida, where most of these cases are reported from. And they like to do it in the rain. The reason they like to do it in the rain is because they're amphibians and they like their skin to stay wet. They don't want to get dried out. When you see a really hard rain falling, and most of us have been in Florida during a really hard rain, it's really hard. Those raindrops hit and they bounce, they splatter, you see stuff all over the place, you see frogs jumping. It looks exactly like these frogs are falling out of the sky and bouncing. That's kind of what you see in this picture here. And that's probably the cause of most of these reports of frogs falling out of the sky. Now these waterspouts and swamp gas, these are kind of fun stories, but they're really not all that relevant to our daily lives, are they? So I want to talk about some of the stories like this that are more relevant to our daily lives. Terrible decisions that many people make, including many of us, based on faulty assumptions. What you're seeing right here is a lie detector test. This is a polygraph. We assume that polygraph tests can tell us when we're lying. Many of you who follow the skeptual, I just invented a new word. Thank you very much. Q&As later. Skeptual. If you follow the skeptual literature, you listen to the skeptual podcast, I'm just going to keep going with that because I like it. You've probably heard that polygraph tests are total nonsense. They're almost always just a device that this guy uses to frighten her into thinking she's not going to be able to lie. And so she tells the truth more often than she would otherwise. Clever polygraphers can often manipulate you into revealing the truth. And this is really more of performance art than it is science by the polygrapher. The machines are uselessly unreliable. They're very easy to fool. Does anyone know one of the easiest ways to fool a polygraph? Feel free to shout it out. Clench. Clench the anal sphincter muscle, and every answer you give will look like a lie. It produces all the same body reactions that these machines measure. However, because so many people, like this young lady, assume that these machines are real, important decisions about people's lives are made today based on polygraph tests. Innocent people still go to jail. It is a myth that polygraph tests are inadmissible in court. That ended a long time ago. Guilty people avoid jail because of polygraph tests. This goes back to the Dobert standard in 1933, often mispronounced Dobert. But before 1993, it was a lot harder to get polygraph tests admitted into court. Since then, it basically falls on the judge to prove that a polygraph test is unreliable. Judges don't have the time or energy for that, and so they're generally admissible. Here's another one that changes people's lives. People's lives are actually, decisions about their lives are made based on their Myers-Briggs personality test. These 4 dichotomies. Are you I or E? Are you S or N? Are you T or F? If everyone knows theirs, shout it out. You're not giving anything away, because if you take the test again tomorrow, it's almost certainly going to be different. We all assume, though, that because we've heard about this so much, that it tells us useful things about our aptitudes, our preferences. The fact is that the results are uselessly inconsistent. They are statistically invalid. To make a dichotomy, we look at the data set. It forms a bell curve for everyone's answer. A bell curve does not represent 2 groups. This test takes that bell curve, slices it cleanly down the middle, and says everyone's either this or that. That's statistically invalid. That's what it means by that. At best, this may indicate your preferences or your comfort zone. It does not indicate your aptitudes. And it is useful maybe as a way to start a conversation with a therapist or something like that, but it's not useful to say, oh, you shouldn't have this job, you should have this job. But unfortunately, that is how it's used. It is used, in fact, in practically every industry except psychology. Career counseling, relationship counseling. My wife and I were actually told we shouldn't get married because the guy who was doing the ceremony made us take this test, and we both came out exactly the same. ISTJ. He said, oh, that'll never work. And that was 21 years ago. Who can tell us what this is? The Rorschach Inkblot test. Sex, this is sex. The Rorschach Inkblot test, we all assume that it gives us some useful insight into personality. However, the fact is, very few of us know about how this test is actually administered and read. Now, we've all seen it in movies. The guy says, oh, what does this look like? You say, oh, you're a sex pervert. In fact, it's very similar to a hot reading that a psychic doing a performance will do. The person who administers the test is not the same person who interprets the test. The person who interprets the test has already read your case file and has all this information about you. Then he looks at the description you gave for each one of these things. It's terrible, terrible, terrible science. He has too much information, and really we've not been able to come up with any kind of correlations between the results for these, how these are read, and what's real about the people. They're stupid. And yet they are still used. They're used in prison parole decisions, child custody decisions, employment decisions. I would hate to lose custody of my kids because of a Rorschach ink blot test, once you know how bad the science really is. But there is even worse science on the horizon. Those of us of a certain age remember the McMartin preschool trial, at the time the most expensive trial in American history, based on recovered memories from children who had such horrible experience that they repressed these memories of having been abused in the McMartin preschool. 7 people had their lives virtually destroyed by this, when in fact there's no evidence that anything bad happened at the McMartin preschool. We now know that there's very bad evidence that anything such as repressed memories even exists. It was based on basically a very eager prosecutor and his friend, a psychiatrist, who was very eager to pursue this idea he had of repressed memories. And they worked together, and they kind of created this whole mythology of what happened, including an underground cavern where they had satanic rituals, stuff that was really, really off the wall. The entire thing got started by one parent who made complaints. The case was started, and then she died, and she was under care for schizophrenia at the time. So her reports were probably very dubious. But by then the banner had already been taken up by this prosecutor and the psychiatrist. Trial lasted 7 years. It cost $15 million. Nobody was found guilty. One of the defendants spent 5 years in jail because he couldn't post bail. 5 years is a long time when you've done nothing wrong. Faulty assumptions, because this case put it into almost all of our consciences that all of these things are a reality, and in fact, they're probably not. Here's another terrible decision that probably most of us have made. I made this most of my life. I believed that taking vitamin C for a cold would reduce the severity or duration of the cold. We now know there's no evidence that it does either. No biochemical reason why we might suspect that it would. However, $225 million are spent each year on vitamin C pills bought by people who think they will prevent or reduce the severity of colds. So this talk is on challenging our assumptions, and I usually give this talk to business audiences because businesses want to reduce waste, whether it's resources, bad decisions. So I ask them these questions. What are the terrible decisions that we all make in here based on faulty assumptions? Assumptions that we have fundamental to what we do in our daily lives, our daily job, that we fail to question. Are we buying the same thing we've always bought? Are we using the same thing we've always used without questioning whether it's the most appropriate tool for the job? Obviously, we all come from different backgrounds, so I'm going to be very general with these questions. Are we doing something the hard way without investigating whether there's an easier way? Because it seems that's the way we were trained to do it, that's the way our coworkers do it. Are we getting our information from the source that we're expected to get the source from? Or might we be able to use some creativity and stop assuming that this is the place to get the best information? These are the kinds of things that you can all take home and think about, regardless of whatever it is you do, whether you're in business, whether you're in education, whether you're retired, whether you're a poor, hungry podcaster like me. Now, this slide is very important. And it's very important because I include it in all of my presentations. It's in case someone comes in the room, it looks like we're doing work. Okay, so I just told you that's what it was. Let's talk about wasted resources now. Wasted resources because of faulty assumptions. Would anyone like to tell me who this fellow is? He's a real animal, not a Bigfoot, Yeti, etc. Who is he? Who? Gigantopithecus blacki. This is the largest of the 3 species of Gigantopithecus. Is Jeannie still in the room? Oh, good. Oh, no, darn it, there she is. She's been one of 2 people who have corrected this section of this presentation in the past. There are insane Yeti hunters in the world who spend real money and spend parts of their lives investigating the abominable snowman in Asia because this was a real animal. They say this is a zoological precedent for what we believe is this cryptid that may exist, the Yeti, the abominable snowman. That's not true. That's a faulty assumption. They've heard a little bit of information. They take the part that confirms their preferred belief. They ignore the part that doesn't, or they don't bother to learn anything more about it. Because everything we do know about Gigantopithecus absolutely positively excludes him as a potential candidate for the abominable snowman of legend. And that's basically 2 things. We can know basically 2 things about him. We have his teeth and his jawbone. Fragmentary jawbones and quite a few teeth of Gigantopithecus blacki. From the teeth, isotopic analysis of the tooth enamel tells us what he ate. And it was basically bamboo and fruit. He did not like to expand its diet, didn't eat anything other than that. And how much bamboo and fruit is there on the slopes of Mount Everest? Very little. The abominable snowman was not Gigantopithecus. The other thing we know about him is his size. From the dimensions of the jawbones, we know that he was a top-heavy ape, something like gorillas. They're always hunched over like this because they're top-heavy. We also know his great size from that. There are no top-heavy animals of such great size who walk on 2 legs. They're all quadrupedal. He would be especially quadrupedal because he was even bigger and heavier than gorillas, quite a bit so. The abominable snowman, however, is always reported to be up on 2 feet. It was not a Gigantopithecus blacki. So the result of this faulty assumption is that there are insane Yeti hunters out there who are wasting their money, wasted resources based on failing to question their assumptions. Now, if you watch the History Channel, you know about this place. This is Oak Island, where there is the Money Pit, a magical pit with a great famous buried pirate treasure at the bottom that people have not managed to find for 200 years, and yet they still keep digging. People have long believed that there is a fortune in gold buried on Oak Island in Nova Scotia. And so we should all go there and throw money and invest in digging equipment and mining equipment and try and dig and find that gold. But the fact is, and geologists can tell you this pretty easily, it was simply a natural sinkhole. There's nothing left of it now because the whole area was dug out by a steam shovel all the way down to bedrock almost 100 years ago. But similar sinkholes have been found on some of the surrounding islands right across the bay. The early miners who were first digging in it and first investing money into mining equipment, when they ran out of money, what did they do? Have you ever read the Mark Twain stories of the mining days in old Virginia City? What did the miners do if they wanted to attract investment? Salted their mine. They would take a couple little gold links of chain and throw it in and say, "Oh, look at this! Evidence of the pirate treasure." They would make a little sign and scribble some Masonic symbols on it and throw it into the hole and say, "Oh, look what we found. It says 20 feet further, there's $1 million in gold," or words to that effect. All the stuff that was found in the Oak Island money pit was almost certainly the result of salting the mine to attract more investment. Yet, the result of this faulty assumption, tens of millions of dollars wasted, and at least 6 people have died on Oak Island over the last more than 200 years. Anyone recognize this? This was in the news probably, 3 weeks ago? Plastic in the ocean, the Pacific garbage patch, the floating island of garbage the size of Texas in the middle of the ocean. We've all heard that there are vast amounts of trash floating in the ocean gyres, the centers of the whirlpools in the middle of every ocean, above and below the equators, going opposite directions. And that's true. There is a lot of plastic trash out there. But it takes about 2 years for trash to get to one of the centers of the gyre. And over that 2 years, what happens to plastic, floating plastic, is that it gets broken down by UV and wave action. And by the time it gets there, it's particulate. It's these little particles. They describe it as looks like someone took a salt shaker or pepper shaker and shook it out on the surface of the water. And I follow this pretty closely because I give this talk fairly often, and I update this all the time. And here's the latest data. This is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They go out there and they measure this. The densest areas in the center of the gyre, you have 1 particle of Newton plastic. Newton means it's floating just at or below the surface. 1 particle of plastic every 30 to 90 square meters, about the size of a tennis court on average. Now that's a problem. I'm not saying it's not a problem, but it's a very different problem than what these people are trying to solve. Because these people are saying that they're going to go out each month from each of these floating booms and collect 10,000 tons of plastic, recycle it at a profit, and resell it. And they've collected $30 million in Silicon Valley money because they think they're going to get 10,000 tons of recyclable plastic out of each one of these every month. That is an absurd overestimation of the problem. If you want to fix the problem of plastic in the ocean, you have to understand the problem. They misunderstand the problem. Their assumption is ridiculously wrong. And so that money is going to be wasted. And by no means is this the only group doing this. Here's a bunch of other proposals trying to do the same thing. That one on the top left is supposed to be fueled. This boat is going to be autonomous, and it gets fueled by burning the plastic that it scoops up. 1 particle every 30 to 90 square meters. Here's another faulty assumption that a lot of people make, that you can make money from a multi-level marketing program. For most people, it's a business opportunity like any other. The presentations are pretty compelling. They show you the graphs that practically guarantee there's no way that you can not make money if you get the minimum number of people to sign up. But we know from actually doing the math that it's pretty much the opposite. There is no way that you can possibly make money. The basic business idea is to recruit people to compete against you. That wouldn't work in any business that any of us know. And for only 1 line, 1 little up-level, down-level line of multi-level marketers in any of these companies or any of the thousands of others that existed, for only 1 line of those to have ever existed at only 14 levels deep would require more people than have ever lived in the history of humanity. So it has never happened that there has been a profitable line of a multi-level marketing system. The result, 99.95% of multi-level marketing customers lose money. They're customers, they're not salespeople or business people, they're customers of these companies. 99.95%, the 0.5 are the original people who are friends and family of the company owners. So my encouragement to you is that if you want to go into business in multi-level marketing, 99.95% chance you will lose money. Instead, go to Las Vegas. Bet all of your money on a single number in roulette, because you will lose only 97.14% of it. I just gave you a 200% return on your money right there. Thank you very much. Tell your friends. So I'd like to know who recognizes this place. Shout it out if you do. I heard murmur, murmur, murmur. Area 51 is close. This is the Nevada test site where they did all of the nuclear testing. Each one of these craters that you see is over an underground cavern that was blasted out by a nuclear explosion. These tests were almost all underground. Very few of them were in the atmosphere, as you see on YouTube. But that's what all of these craters were. And downwind of the Nevada test site is basically St. George, Utah. And the people there have been called the downwinders. And it is very rational sounding. I'm the first to agree that it makes perfect sense that the downwinders probably had an increased incidence of cancer from fallout from the nuclear tests. Everything we know about nuclear radiation supports that idea. It's very reasonable. In fact, $1.5 billion in government payouts has been made to the downwinders because eventually there were so many lawyers going door to door in St. George, Utah saying, let's sue the government and make money. What they did is they set up basically a fallout court. If you lived in this certain area, over this certain period of time, and you had a disease on this schedule, you would be entitled to a payment of this amount. No trials, no arguments. It was that simple. $1.5 billion. However, after 60 years, we now have a much better backwards look at the data set, and it turns out that nobody suffered ill effects. There were zero increased incidence of cancer among the downwinders. The reason was the exposure, although it was there, it was real, it was elevated. It was very brief. It was probably less than a day for each time one of these atmospheric tests was conducted. So it was very brief and not all that great of exposure anyway. So any increased incidence of cancer they suffered was below the noise threshold, not measurable. So a great deal of resources wasted there based on faulty assumptions. Amelia Earhart. I've seen the History Channel. I know all about Amelia Earhart. Didn't they find her shoe and a skeleton and a perfume bottle and some other things on some island because she and her navigator didn't fly straight to here? Instead, they flew straight to here, said, oh, we can't find it. Let's go way over here. No, that didn't happen. We know that didn't happen because they didn't have enough fuel and because they were in immediate radio contact with their intended destination at the time they disappeared. They ran out of fuel within radio contact of the USS Itasca, the Coast Guard cutter, USCG Itasca. Excuse me, my apologies to the Navy people in the audience. We know for a fact that she didn't go to this ridiculous other island that all of the media coverage of Amelia Earhart has promoted in the last 40 years. It's all the result of one guy who has built his entire career on this idea he has and the press releases he constantly sends to the magazines, to the Discovery Channel, History Channel, Nat Geo. They've all made documentaries promoting his crank theory. It's simply not true. That's a lot of wasted resources. 20 years of TV programming, that costs a lot of money. Expensive expeditions, that costs a lot of money. And lost investor capital. So wasted resources. What are some of the things that some of us might be doing? Are we using people for what their job description is rather than for what their hidden talents might be? Do we actually know what people that we work with are good at? Might they be better doing something else? Are we wasting human resources? Are we wasting time? I'm guilty of number two. I have to do everything myself because I either can't afford someone or because someone else isn't going to do as good of a job as I am. I just assume those things. They're probably not true in many cases. Or do we spend too much money buying the most expensive gear when good enough gear will do? That's something that a lot of our employers do. It's wasted resources based on faulty assumptions. These are things we can all take home and think about and question. So let's talk about the most dramatic of the effects that faulty assumptions can have. Physical harm, because it does happen. This is my age test when I give this talk to a college audience. They all know Steve Jobs. It kills my soul how few of them know Steve McQueen and Jim Henson. What do these guys all have in common? They died from alternative medicine. They basically died leaving fatal diseases untreated because they had faith in alternative medicine. Many people believe the big pharma conspiracy. They believe that alternative medicines are safe and effective. In fact, they're completely ineffective. That's why we call them alternative medicine. And the result is that people like these die much earlier than they needed to from untreated illness. Here's a related case. This lady on the right is one of China's barefoot doctors giving a vaccine to the lady on the left as part of Mao's barefoot doctor program. This is in a broader sense. Many of us assume, because we've been drilled into this our whole lives, that traditional Chinese medicine is relied upon heavily in China. Wouldn't you agree that that's probably true, that they use traditional medicine in China? That's a myth. It was a myth that was created by American book editors. In the early 1970s, the New Age movement was blossoming. Nixon went to China. Kung Fu was on TV with David Carradine. There was this whole obsession with all things Eastern and all things China. The Western audiences, the Western New Age movement was obsessed with it, and they demanded more. So book editors, American book editors, took the 900-page paramedic manual published by the Mao administration called the Barefoot Doctor's Manual. 900 pages of good medical information that was given out to every village. Here's what you do if a cart falls on someone and breaks their leg. Here's what you do if they get malaria. Here's what you do if this happens or that happens. It's basically paramedic information and then prescription drugs. If you can get to a town that has a pharmacy, you need to give them this, prescribe them this. However, it was China in the 1950s and 1960s. Those things were not always available. So the book also, at the end of each section in the book, it also contained a small section on, okay, if you can't do any of those things, give them this plant, give them this root. Aspirin comes from a root, okay? It's not terrible, it's better than nothing. American editors cut out 600 pages of real medical information, real paramedic and first aid information from the Barefoot Doctor's Manual and published it as a concise edition of the Barefoot Doctor's Manual, 300 pages left. American audiences loved it. And all you get as an American reader is the fact that, oh, Chinese rely entirely upon herbs for all their medicine. Simply wasn't true. This has become religion among many Western people. The result, just like our previous slide, people die based on untreated illness because they rely on what they think is some Eastern Enlightenment that was just a pipe dream of editors and authors. Many of us know some people who were involved in debunking this device to great success. This is the ADE 651 bomb detector. Sold in huge quantities, mostly to Iraq, but to many countries in the region. It's basically a dowsing rod. It does nothing whatsoever. That is just a little antenna on a hinge that goes back and forth. The cord is connected to a thing on your belt clip that is connected to nothing at all. It's heavy, so it feels like it's real electronic equipment. And you're trained to use it that if the antenna wobbles, that there's a bomb in the car when you're scanning a car with this. What is it actually doing? What's it actually measuring? The ideomotor effect. Most of us know about this. So it's completely a sham product. However, governments assumed that if people were spending money on it, it must be a real thing, right? Iraq spent over $75 million on these from one company. Fortunately, the guy who founded that company is currently in jail. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, it was too little too late because there are now countless copycat companies selling essentially exactly the same copycat device all over Iraq and the Middle East. It's pretty much a battle that has been lost. We hope for that to turn around. Bad assumptions, bad results. Sometimes we assume that if we go to a hostile location with good intentions, our good intentions will be returned to us. If we go to a hostile place like Afghanistan that has warned South Koreans who come here will be killed or captured or kidnapped, if we go there with a message of hope and peace and love, that will be returned to us. Well, these 23 South Korean missionaries went there in 2007 after the Taliban issued a decree, a warning to all South Koreans that any South Koreans captured there would be killed or kidnapped. These 23 missionaries went there. They defied this order. They figured if we go there as missionaries showing love, they'll treat us like brothers, whatever. As you may remember, the 23 of them were almost immediately kidnapped as soon as they got into the country. It was an international incident that lasted weeks. 2 of them were executed. The first one to die was, I'm not sure if he's in this picture, but he was the pastor. It was 17 women and 6 men. The second man to die was also one of the 2 men. Did you get that? The second man was also one of the men. This is skepticism, folks. 2 of the women were returned as a sign of goodwill after they murdered 2 guys. South Korea finally agreed to pay a $20 million ransom and to pull all of South Korea's troops out of Afghanistan. These people made a catastrophically bad assumption. They were so invested in their belief, in their preferred belief in the humanity of man or whatever it was, or good Christian treatment, that their feelings would be returned, and of course they weren't. I'm going to be really brief on this last one because I've talked about this a lot on the podcast and because I'm getting short on time, and there's one thing, a very important thing I want to get to. So we've got on the left, we have Chernobyl, and we have on the right, oh, you're wrong. It's a coal-fired power plant. Everyone yells 3 Mile Island. No. So the assumption that many people have made is that Chernobyl proved that nuclear energy is too dangerous to continue with. And I can go on about this at length, so I'm just going to truncate it very briefly today. Go to skeptoid.com and search for nuclear if you want more of my thoughts on this. But the nuclear reactors that are being designed today have no potential to do what happened at Chernobyl. That's like saying a car might fly up in the air like a hot air balloon. They're simply completely different devices. From all non-Chernobyl reactors in history, 0 cases of future cancer are predicted from all nuclear accidents. And it's not just 3 Mile Island and Fukushima. There have been many, many, many nuclear accidents, particularly on naval vessels, where you've got a lot of nuclear reactors that the rest of us never hear about. They have accidents on those, leaks and things like that. The fact is that the risks are simply misunderstood by the public. The systems do work reasonably well to contain them. That's why nobody was killed from radiation at Fukushima or 3 Mile Island. But the result is that the nuclear industry was completely crippled in the 1980s. And despite 0 people dying from non-Chernobyl style reactors, we increased our reliance on coal-fired reactors to the point that even today, 60,000 people a year die in the United States alone from lung cancer caused by particulate air pollution from coal-powered reactors. That's 60,000 deaths a year compared to 0, because so many of us were so compelled by this popular belief that nuclear power is too dangerous to use. Anyway, I know there's a lot of arguments and a lot of subtleties about this and a lot of counter-arguments. I handle all of those on the Skeptoid.com website. What I want to get to is your final thoughts. Physical harm. And we don't all think, gee, my faulty assumptions that I make might cause physical harm, but they might. What about driving on ice? Maybe you think, oh, I'm a good enough driver, I can handle that. What about hiking in the woods? Maybe you think, oh, where's Kevin? Oh, my feet aren't going to get plantar fasciitis if I try to. Sorry, Kevin. I'm not going to get lost in the woods and die. I've had 2 or 3 beers, I can drive safely. These are all the kinds of assumptions that we all make that are wrong. So I've got 30 seconds left. I'm going to skip to my final thing here. I promised I'd come back to Timothy McVeigh. 16 years ago today, June 11th, 2001, Timothy McVeigh was executed by lethal injection. So you think about something that happened, that today is the anniversary of it, brings it a little bit closer to home. That faulty assumptions are closer to many of us than we think. And that we might be making faulty assumptions today that are impacting our lives. Our lives might be a lot better if we made fundamentally different decisions about some of the things we do. What do these assumptions cost us? How do we fix them? Many of you know that over the past 6 months, my nonprofit, Skeptoid Media, has been producing this film, Principles of Curiosity. It is a free 40-minute introduction to critical thinking. It is a nonprofit film, non-commercial. It's released to the entire world for free under a Creative Commons license. It comes with free lesson plans for educators. It is a great project. I am incredibly proud of it. It is being premiered in LA on Wednesday. However, for all of you here, you can see it now, tonight, whenever. Just go to this address, principlesofcuriosity.com/skeptical. It's not case sensitive, actually. You can just type skeptical. But then the organizers of this conference would say, damn it, that's the problem we face. principlesofcuriosity.com/skeptical. Please do not share this link publicly. This is my gift to you to thank you for having me come and speak to you today, which I very much enjoyed. Thank you very much.